This is a call to action. We must stand united and demand justice.
Today, we're diving into a legal battle that's become so much more than that. It's put an entire nation's principles on trial. And really, it all boils down to one fundamental question.
So, let's just think about this for a second. When does one person's court case stop being just about them and start acting like a mirror, reflecting the health of an entire country?
Well, in Nigeria, the saga of a man named Nnamdi Kanu has become exactly that mirror. You could almost think of his case as a diagnostic test. You know, a way to check the vital signs of the nation's justice system, its politics, and even its unity.
So to really get a grip on the weight of this whole thing, we've got to go back and look at the timeline. And it all revolves around this one man, right at the center of the storm.
Okay, so first things first, who is Nnamdi Kanu? He's the leader of a group called the Indigenous People of Biafra, or IPOB for short. Now, this is a movement pushing for self-determination for the Igbo people, who are mainly in the southeastern part of Nigeria. And Kanu himself, his words are often described as really provocative, but also powerful. He's ignited this incredibly passionate support from his followers, but at the same time, some really strong opposition from the government.
All right, this timeline really lays out a whole decade of conflict. It all kicks off in 2015, when Kanu gets arrested and charged with treasonable felony. Fast forward to 2017, he gets bail. But then he flees the country after a military operation at his family home. Then things get really dramatic in 2021. He's captured in Kenya and brought back to Nigeria in what's called an extraordinary rendition. But then comes a huge twist in 2023. Nigeria's own Court of Appeal says, hey, that rendition was illegal, and they actually order his release. But that order was defied. And the timeline wraps up, for now, in 2025, where he's convicted and sentenced to life in prison. Okay, that moment right there, the government basically ignoring its own high court. That was a massive turning point. So let's zoom in on this clash between the court and the state.
Yeah, so the date you really need to remember here is 2023. This wasn't some minor court. It was Nigeria's Court of Appeal. They made a super clear ruling. They said the way Kanu was brought back to the country was illegal, which basically threw out the charges against him. Their order couldn't have been clearer. Release him immediately. And you know, in a system based on the rule of law, that really should have been the end of it.
But it wasn't the end. Not even close. The federal government just refused to comply. They argued that letting him go was a national security risk. And right there, that's the core conflict of this whole story, the rule of law clashing head-on with the power of the state.
And you have to understand, this wasn't just about one man's case anymore. This clash sent shockwaves through the entire system. It put Nigeria's democratic institutions under some serious strain, and it started to reveal some deep, pretty worrying issues just beneath the surface.
So, what did it expose? Well, the source material points to 4 big cracks in the system. First, this idea of selective obedience, where the government seems to obey court orders it likes and ignore the ones it doesn't. Second, you've got worries about political interference, basically the fear that justice is being used as a tool in political fights. Third, the way Kanu was captured and held, it really made people question the country's commitment to human rights. And finally, this whole thing has just poured salt in the wounds of an already fragile national unity, making the divisions between the Southeast and the federal government even wider.
And these weren't just internal problems either. This whole saga has really damaged Nigeria's reputation on the world stage. I mean, things got even more intense in 2025 when a court in Kenya also ruled that his transfer from their country was illegal. When you get that kind of international legal spotlight, it can affect everything from diplomatic relationships to whether foreign companies feel confident investing in your country.
So where does this leave Nigeria? Well, the analysis we're looking at suggests the country is at a major crossroads. The way this one case has been handled has basically laid out 2 very different paths for the future.
And you can see those 2 futures laid out right here. On one side, you have what you might call the suppressive path. This is all about using force, security-only responses. The danger there? More resentment, a total collapse of trust in institutions, and ultimately a weaker democracy. But then there's the other option, the reconciliation path. This would mean real dialogue, actually talking about old grievances, and it could lead to a much stronger, more inclusive Nigeria where people actually trust the rule of law again.
And really, it all boils down to a pretty simple but urgent lesson from the source material. When justice is compromised, unity just becomes impossible. You can't have one without the other. They're completely tied together.
Which leaves us with one last really powerful question to think about. See, the Nnamdi Kanu saga is way more than just a legal drama. It's become a test for the whole country. The question for Nigeria isn't just about one man anymore. It's about what kind of nation it actually wants to be. So, will this whole episode be remembered as just another chapter of suppression? Or could it, maybe, become the unlikely spark for real, deep reform? The answer to that is what's going to define Nigeria for a long, long time.
Subscribe and like. See you soon.